Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first virtual digital humanities program of fall 2021. My name is Pam Lack. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the digital humanities librarian here at San Diego State, where I direct our Digital Humanities Center. And I'm actually in the DH Center right now. And I also co-direct our campus-wide DH initiative. And before we dive in, I want to begin, as I always do, with the SDSU land acknowledgement. And let me put the link to that in chat if you would like to read along. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. And I encourage you, if you're not here on Kumeyaay land, to share where you're Zooming from. And if you're not sure, you can consult this website. It's not 100% comprehensive, but feel free to put in chat a little introduction if you like, including where you are. And while you're doing that, I'm going to put a link in chat as well. This is a Google Doc that I'm sharing that has a bunch of links and resources for you, so you can follow along. Just a few quick words. So the Digital Humanities Center is open again for those of you who are active SDSU members, and you can consult our website to learn more about how you can get access. We are using a hybrid model this semester, whereby the space is physically open, but it's been reoriented for physically distanced study, but all of our programs are virtual. We do also have digital studios, and they are available by appointment. If you are interested in learning more about our other virtual programs this fall, you can check the link out at teachdh.sdsu.edu/programming. You can register for all of our upcoming events, and you can explore the virtual events we held last year as well. So we hope that you'll join us. So let me just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be doing today. So unlike all of last year when we were doing formal digital tools workshops, what I wanted to focus on this semester was something less than a workshop and more than an exploration. So I landed on the term refresher. So the tool refresher is a kind of more on the fly workshop. I don't have anything prepped. It's going to be totally on the fly. I'm going to show you how to use a tool in each of these sessions. If the tool is one that supports real-time collaboration, we will do it together. And so we'll be able to do that today. But it's sort of low key. I don't have any prepared slides or formal talking points. So what that means is if you have a question, raise your hand or put it in chat. I am now using two screens, so I might miss the chat. And so if I do, just unmute yourself and talk over me so I don't miss you. But really, this is meant to be casual and kind of informal. So what I thought I would do is sort of show you the tool, walk you through it, and then show you from start to finish how you would use it. So with that being said, well, before I dive in, any questions about any of that? Okay, awesome. If there are, just put them in chat. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we are going to be exploring a tool that I love to use called TimelineJS. And this is the primary link to it. This is a tool that I use a lot in my teaching. And I work with a lot of faculty here at San Diego State to use it in their teaching as well. And some of the stuff that I love about this is that it displays really lovely timelines that are browser-based, that are media-rich, that are highly interactive, and it's pretty easy to use. Moreover, it's collaborative. So the way that TimelineJS works is that it feeds off of a live Google Spreadsheet that you can update on the fly. And so it's a great teaching tool because we can update the spreadsheet in real time and then see the results. And that's actually what we're going to do today. To give you an example of what it looks like, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. And hopefully this works. I've never done this with two screens before in a session. Okay, can you see the worksheet, the the quick sheet. Okay, cool. So I've got two examples of completed timelines. The first is by a history professor here at San Diego State. Let me just check chat real quick. Okay, perfect. This is based on her own research on the depiction of witches over time in popular culture, with a particular emphasis on cinema. Because I'm displaying it on a bigger screen, it's not taking up the full screen real estate. But what you can see is in the upper left corner, there's some media. And because of how she made this image, this is living in a Google Drive. I can sort of navigate, pan and zoom, and I can also pop it out and look at just the image itself, which is a compilation of images. And then I can scroll along, and there's a couple different ways that I can navigate this space. So I can scroll in a chronological fashion. I can also zoom out and actually scroll along the timeline part and then randomly start clicking on things. And you can see that she's got YouTube videos embedded and different background colors. And I can jump around any which way. And as I get lost in the, if I get lost in the timeline, I can zoom sort of in and out to get a bigger or closer view, a more zoomed out or a more zoomed in view. She also has themes. So classical, I can't read that, it's too faint. Early modern woodcut, pre-Raphaelites, Disney spellcasters, other film depictions. So I can see at a sort of bird's eye view that different things at different points are different themes. So for instance, I'm not going to expect to see Disney show up before, 1920, let's say. And if I zoom in, you can, and I sort of expand out the timeline, you can actually start to see that Disney shows up, around right when you would expect, the late, looks like mid to late 30s. So that's one example of somebody using it for their research. Now let's look at a teaching context. So this next example is one I did with Professor Pollard, but with her class. Let me find that link really quickly. She was teaching a class on comics and history, and the students were studying depictions of social justice across the history of comics. And she took a long view. So she actually was looking at precursors to comics, including things like cave art. And so we worked as a class in fall of 2020 to produce a collaborative timeline where each student picked a comic from a different time period, annotated it with vocabulary and concepts that they'd learned in the class, and then we compiled it together. And you can see we have different themes: wealth and equality, gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, and immigration, plus a catch-all other. And if I scroll along, you're going to see she's starting at like 30,000 BCE, right? So I have to really zoom out to get a longer view. And in this timeline, what we have is different periods have a different color background. So this is the Stone Age. So we picked kind of like a stone-esque color. And then if I scroll along, I really have to zoom out here. I'll just keep scrolling along. Then we get into these new phases here, different colors. And again, this is the student work. And so you can see an annotated comic where they're applying the things that they've learned in the class and then making an argument about this particular theme, this comic, and this moment in time. So it's a really lovely way to engage the students in collaborative and active learning in a way that's more public facing. And so these are some of the reasons that I really love TimelineJS. Okay, so now that you've seen it, before we go into the back end, any questions about the timeline as it presents sort of on the front end? And if you're more comfortable chatting, that's cool too, or you can raise your hand. And if no one has any questions, we'll just keep going.
I'm curious on how you how this becomes like shareable. Is it something that's embedded on a website, say on like WordPress? Is it something you can just email to someone, or how does one kind of access this?
Both of the above, all of the above. So and we'll see this today, when you publish your timeline, you get a link. It's a very long, messy link. You can see here in the browser bar. It's very, very long. But so I typically will make a short link through tinyURL. You can use bit.ly, anything like that, but you can share that. But it also provides HTML embed code. So you can actually embed it into another website, including a Google site, a WordPress site, anything that allows embedding, code embedding. And that's great too. And the other thing I'll add is that you're seeing my timeline on a very big screen. It's not really, I can change it and sort of optimize the size. I can make the height more like 1,000, but it also displays really well on a smartphone. And so here I basically just changed the height here to display it differently. But on your screen, if you did that on like a little laptop, you wouldn't be able to see the whole timeline. But if you were to take that link here, either one of these links here, and click on it on your phone or on a tablet, you would see it would also display pretty nicely, though the orientation would be different because of the size of the screen. So that's to say it's browser-based and device responsive, which is another lovely tool, another lovely factor to consider there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for that great question. Okay, so let's actually dive in and see how this works. So if you navigate to timeline, I should add, the group that makes this tool, NightLab, is a group at Northwestern University in Chicago, or just outside Chicago. And it started as a set of data visualization and storytelling tools for journalists. But so many other scholars and not just scholars and folks in cultural heritage sectors really loved it. So I find that TimelineJS, a lot of historians really like it, but it was actually originally created for journalists to tell more visual stories about what they were reporting. So it's really versatile in that respect. So I've already got the website. Here we go. Okay, so when you click on timeline.nightlab.com, you go to the website and you can either explore it and you can see some of their galleries, a whole bunch of their other tools, and I'll be focusing on, well, actually the tools are in another place, examples, and it also has documentation. And so what you would really do is just follow the directions. So to make a timeline, you just make a timeline, click there. And what it does is it gives you a link to the template, which is a Google spreadsheet. And you would make a copy for your own Google Drive. So the only thing you really need here is a Google Drive. And when I'm working with classes, for folks who don't have their own Google account, or for folks who don't want to use their own Google account for privacy purposes, I basically either give them a template where I give them edit rights without being logged into Google, or I create a template for them to use for their own project. So it's really helpful there. And so what I can do is under share, I can change this to anyone with the link. Now, normally you would want to stick this as anyone with the link can view, but in order for all of us to work on it today, I'm going to change this to editor. And then once I give you the link, you'll be able to actually pull up this sheet and we can work on it together. If you're doing your own timeline, you want to make sure you're not sharing editing rights with the general public, right? You want to just share it with your collaborators. I'm actually not going to share it with you just yet because I want to walk you through the template and then I'll share it with you. So every TimelineJS template starts like this. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename mine, which doesn't affect anything. And just to be fancy, I'm going to put my date on as well. And it's in my drive already. If I wanted to organize it, I could move it somewhere else. I'll do that later. So every template starts with the following things. And I'm going to actually make the spreadsheet a little bit bigger so you can see a little bit more of that spreadsheet. So what you'll see in the first row is a set of field names or column names. These cannot be changed. So you never, ever, ever want to change these. And you'll see a tiny little triangle in the upper right corner with a little comment. and it tells you what that thing is. So you'll see the year is required, except for one type of thing, and then month, day, et cetera, et cetera. So the biggest challenge with TimelineJS is going from this to this, which is to say, to begin thinking, if we think about a timeline as events put together to tell a larger story or a larger narrative, we then have to break it out into rows of data. And a lot of humanists were not trained to think about their work in terms of data or in terms of spreadsheets. So in this case, it's something of a conceptual leap for folks to think about, okay, what are the chunks of the story I'm trying to tell, and how do I represent that as rows, things going across in that timeline. So every row in the timeline is the equivalent of one of these, what we would call a slide. And so this is one, and everything has essentially fields or attributes that we need to complete. And that would be all of the columns. So each column is one component of the slide, and each row is one slide, which is to say one point on the timeline. And so because this is a template, it's just very important that you don't add or delete any of the columns. Those are the vertical rows, think marble columns or something like that. But we can add as many rows, horizontal rows, as we want. I found in my experience with TimelineJS that it's really good with up to like maybe anywhere between 30 and 50 events. Anything over like 50, it starts to really break down. So if you're planning a timeline with hundreds of events, what we've done in the past is chunked them out into different chunks of timeline. It's just that the tool just isn't really optimized for that much content. Okay, so essentially what you're going to see is some different colors here. So red, these are the essential things. Every timeline, everything you put on the timeline needs at the very least a year, because TimelineJS needs to know where to pin it, right? If it doesn't have a timeline, a date, it will not have anywhere to live. The one exception being the home, the title slide. That obviously, because it's the title, it's configured differently, and that's the only place where you don't need a date. But you don't need to be any more granular than 1 year. So if you know a precise month or day, or even a time of day, you can add that, but you don't need to. You can display a single day, a week, a month, a year, or many years, which is to say your event can be as small of a time period or as big of a time period as you need. And so the end year is optional. That would be if it's a span of time, but if you're just doing 1 day or 1 point in time, you wouldn't need that. You can also make a display date. And this is really handy for instance, if you're working with BCE and you want to convey things in a different way, or if in our case, in this one, we used the display date instead to include the students' names, because there was no place for them to add their names to get public credit for it. So some students just used their first name and an initial. Other students, actually, I think most of the students in this class just used an initial for a little bit more anonymity, but this way they could like send the timeline out to their friends and be like, check it out, look what I did, and get a little bit of credit for that. So you can put anything in that display date, and that corresponds to this, this little text above what we call the title, or in this case, the headline. Then the text, this is the description. In this class, they had to do, I think, 300 to 500 words, a full argument about their annotation. You can do as little or as much text as you want. And then the media object is the image here. Now with the media, everything needs to already be online. So you can grab an image from another website, provided you're not violating copyright. And I can show you how to do that. In our case, what we did was the students created their annotated image, and then they loaded them into a public Google Drive folder that I'd created. And then that fed this link right here. And then there's space to give credit and do a citation, essentially, as well as a caption. One can do a media thumbnail, and that would live down here, but you'd have to resize your image and load it somewhere. It's pretty complex. We usually skip that piece of it. And then type. Now with type, we leave that alone unless we're doing a title slide. I've not actually played around with the era slide, so I'm not entirely sure what happens there. Group, if you want to do different themes in your timeline, that would be the group. So you can create as many as you want, but you need to have what we would call a controlled vocabulary, because essentially, if you typed wealth inequality and then typed wealth inequalities, the tool is not smart enough to know that those are the same things, right? It's purely looking at an exact letter match. And so if you have slight variations, it will treat those groupings as separate. And then finally, a background. If you want to have a background color, you would use what's called a hex code, which is one of the ways that color is expressed digitally. And you could use any kind of hex color picker to actually find a hex code that you want. And hex code is a hashtag and then a combination of 6 letters and numbers. And so as you see here, this is one, I don't know what color this is off the top of my head. So it's a hashtag and colors. You can also put an image in. So if you'd prefer to have an image as your backdrop, you can do that as well. Okay, any questions about that before I show you what this actually looks like in action? Let's check chat. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So generally what I do is I start by wiping out the content. And I do that here. Oops. Actually, I want to make sure I don't mess anything up. I'm going to leave this title drop down so that the tool knows that that's my introductory slide. And then I'm going to just go ahead and add a few more slides to the bottom, or a few more rows to the bottom, maybe 20 more. And let me just check chat. I see something coming in. Yes, Evan asks whether it supports foreign language. So this is a really good question. The tool is kind of language agnostic. The tool doesn't understand the content of the spreadsheet. All that this template is doing is you pump it into the TimelineJS website to produce a visualization. You can put absolutely anything in your text. The only thing you have to be careful about is making sure, I would say that you want to make sure that any kind of accents or diachronic markings that you have, I would probably use a plain text editor to make sure that everything renders properly so that it displays well for the web. But essentially anything that's Unicode or UTF, 8, I think, or 16, anything can go in this spreadsheet. A couple things to keep in mind though. If you want lots of paragraphs of text, if you try to enter a paragraph in, and I don't know if anyone's ever tried to hit enter when putting something into a spreadsheet. I'm going to pull up some text. I use a text generator. This just produces gibberish text, and in this case, it's dog themed. There's lots of different kinds of text here. If you try to put text, say I'm typing a lot of stuff here, and I hit enter because I want to start a new paragraph the way I would in Microsoft Word, it's going to knock me down to the next row. If I try to copy that text in with the paragraph breaks, it will technically work in that it will treat it as one big chunk of text. However, it will not render that way. It will just render as one big paragraph. So if you want to have paragraphs, what you're going to have to do is use a little bit of HTML. HTML is totally optional, but it does work in this tool. Yes?
Like the whole thing, that what you just did, and then the actual effects of it.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
Okay, so it wasn't a question. Oh, well, I guess it is a question. So can you redo that? Like, can you put all of the text in and then actually show us like the visual effects of it? So
yeah, I can't show you yet because I haven't published it, but I will show it what that looks like once I publish this.
All right.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'll go over all of this a little bit more closely. But essentially, if you want to have actual formatting in your text, like bold or italics, you're going to have to use a little bit of HTML. And I believe I have a link here. This link here will actually give you, let me put this in chat for y'all. There we go. This will take you to more resources for TimelineJS, including, let me find it here. I think if you go to this website, this is a website I've been working on with Dr. Pollard. There's an actual HTML tutorial where you can actually see the kind of HTML that works in TimelineJS, so that if you do want to power up with a little HTML, again, you don't need to, but if you want to, you can do that here. And this specific link is, get that in chat as well. There we go. Okay. So just close out some of my tabs. I've got way too many going. Okay. So let me walk you through filling out one entry, and then we're all going to give it a try. And then what I'm going to actually do is fill out the entry, publish it, so I can demonstrate the differences in the paragraphs and all of that. And then we're all going to try it and be able to see the timeline transform on the fly. So I'll just, again, I'm going to just do the title. Again, I don't need any date information because this is just the title. So oops, you can see what a bad typist I am. Hang on, there we go. Okay. We're learning how to make a timeline. Okay, so again, if I want to put an image in or a video or something like that, it has to live on the web. So we have a couple of options. I have actually loaded some test images that we can work with. And those are all available at this link here. I'll put it back in chat really quickly. Yep. Or we can grab something from the web. So I'm going to do an image search for adorable puppies. I don't have to type adorable because puppies are all adorable. I'm going to click on images. And what I'm going to do is go to actually, I'm going to do this in Google. I don't normally use Google as my search engine, but I know it's the most common one. So I'm going to do a search for images by clicking on the image button in the Google search. And then I'm going to go to tools and usage rights. Sometimes in the old, even just a few months ago, this was just under advanced settings. What I'm going to do is say, I want to use Creative Commons licenses. I want to filter out anything that's under copyright. And so now in theory, these are all free to use. They're in the public domain. And I say in theory because it's not always 100%. But let's say I want to use this adorable puppy. What I need to do is get what's called the image URL. This is not, I have to actually get to the image itself. And depending on what browser you're using, this is going to be different. So I'm using Chrome right now. So what I can do is right click on the image and I can copy that link address. But just so you see it, I'm going to open the link in a new tab. This is just the image of the puppy. And I know this because the URL ends with a .jpg, which is an image format. I'm going to copy this entire URL and I'm going to put that here. And I'm going to try to give it credit. So I got this from what is this website? Oh, here we go. I'll just put the link where I got it from. And I'll say Creative Commons license. You can put anything you want there. And that's all I need to do for that first title slide. Let me put in 1 or 2 more things and then I will publish it and then we will all work on it. So let's say I want to put something in the year 1985. If I want to put a month or a day, I have to express it numerically, right? So I can't put September. I would have to actually put 9. And let's say I want to put today, but today's date in 1985, today's the 17th. If this is just one day, I can leave it as that. If I want it to be a span of time, I can say, let's say it's like roughly 2 weeks, I can do that. I can put a display date in or not. And remember, the comment tells me whether it's optional or not. If I leave it blank, it just does the default display date. And I need to give it some sort of pithy little headline. Of course, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but see, I keep mistyping here. Here we go, puppies. Okay, so now I'm just going to put some text in. And again, let me show you. I'm going to grab this fake text. I'm just going to stick it in. A couple things to remember. So here we've got, technically it's 3 paragraphs, and we'll just remember that because again, when we see it displayed, it's not going to display this way. When I hit tab or enter to go to the next cell, it's going to change the display of the spreadsheet. And it's really hard to see now. And so a lot of folks struggle with this as well. So it can be a little disorienting to know like where you are in the timeline, in the spreadsheet, especially if you're working on a small screen. And even on a big screen, I'm having a little bit of trouble. I'm going to actually make my screen a little bit smaller now. And just for the sake of making this easier, I'm going to get rid of one of these paragraphs so that now we can see more rows. And it's going to be very small to see. Okay, so now let's do media. In this case, I'm going to use one of my test images. I don't know what's what, so I'm just going to randomly grab one. And I'm just going to get the link. These should be set to anyone with the link can view, otherwise they won't render. So I've done that already. So I'm just going to copy a link and put it in my timeline. Now TimelineJS will claim that there is an error here because TimelineJS is only looking for a URL that ends with .jpg or .png or something like that. And so sometimes it will run an error, sometimes it won't. And here it's actually showing me a preview of the image, which is pretty cool. That's my dog, Ginny. So the media credit is photo by Pam. Ginny loves the beach. Okay, let's say, now here, I'm not going to do anything for the type because this is just a regular timeline entry. I can put a group in and say dog beach is, say that's my group, or I could leave that blank. And if I want to change the background color, I would find a color that I like. So I could pick the color family that I want, and then I would just copy the hex code and paste it in. You can use any hex code color picker that you want. That's just the one I randomly searched for. So let me do one more just so you get a sense of that. I'm just trying to remember what year it is. And here I'll just put my own text in, and then I'll grab another one of my images. Let me do this one because this is more recent. Get link. I'm going to copy that link and I'm going to put it here. I've also taken that photo. And this is my new puppy, Pablo Socks. And I'm not going, I'll add a new group for baby boy, and I'm not going to bother with a color. Okay, so I'm going to now publish this and then we will all give it a try. But any questions before I do that? Make sure I'm not seeing any chat. Okay, so just as a refresher, we've got our title slide. And we've got 2 entries, one for 1985 and one for 2021. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back to my timeline generator and follow the instructions. So first, what I have to do is take this timeline and publish it to the web. And it shows me how to do that. So under File, I'm going to hit Publish to the Web. I'm going to change this to OD1, which is what it's recommending. And then I'm going to click Publish, and it's going to say, are you sure? It always does this. Yes, I'm sure. I'm going to ignore this URL. And instead, I'm going to grab this URL, and I'm going to put it right here. I can configure the width and height if I want to. 650 is a sort of general one that's good for laptops. So I'm not going to do anything. I can change things. So if I wanted to change the language, I could do that for better rendering. And that was, I think, Evan's question. If I want to start the slide at something other than the title, I could specify that. And in a lot of web-based things and digital things, the first thing is 0, not 1. So 0 refers to the title slide, or this row. This is confusing, but row 2 of the spreadsheet. I can change the zoom level if I want. I don't normally play with that. I can start at the end of the timeline if I want to start at the end instead of the beginning. I can change the configuration of the timeline if I want. And I can use hash bookmarks. And the neat thing about a hash bookmark is if I do that, it means that every slide has a unique URL. So I could potentially send someone a link to the middle slide instead of making them go to the beginning and scroll through everything. So you can do that as well. I sometimes do that for specific purposes, but not for, like if you're doing a collaborative timeline in your class, you could do that so each student has their own unique URL that they can share out rather than making someone like hunt for their slide. When I've got everything configured, I would then hit preview. So here's my adorable puppy.
I have a question. Okay, so whenever you do the link for the certain type of slide, are you putting it just at that slide, or are you putting it in a group? Like you're saying like 2 to 7, or are you saying like 36 and then that's it?
I don't 100% understand your question. Can you say it again?
Like in the slide, instead of going at 1, like you're going and you're jumping ahead. Are you grouping it like 2 to 7? Or are you just doing 1 and it continues on with the rest of the slides?
So the URL that you get is for the entire timeline.
Yes.
And depending on how you've configured it, if you use the hash bookmarks, that would change the URL for each slide. Otherwise, whenever someone clicks on the link, it takes you to the start of the timeline, or if you've configured it to start at the end or a specific slide. And you would scroll through either using...
So each hash bookmark is its own slide, correct?
Its own URL.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So in this is not a good example. In this one, it's the same URL for each. I did not configure that. And if you look at this bar here, as I scroll through, it's not changing the URL. I do have an example really quickly. Let me pull it up. Sorry, I have so many things. Give me 1 minute and I'll pull up another example. Let's see. Okay, this timeline, we actually used the hash bookmarks. So keep an eye on that URL as I scroll through. It's changing, and you see it has hashtag and then something amended to it. So event and then the title of that entry in the timeline. And that way I could have a specific URL to a specific point in the timeline.
I think that's really beautiful. Like every time it changes, like it's like a little detail.
Yeah, that's something you can use if you have a need for it. In this case, I wanted to use it because we were doing we did a presentation about teaching with timelines as a timeline, and I wanted to be able to jump from one slide to another. And so I wanted to have specific URLs. For most of the timelines that I do, I don't bother doing that. I just do it in certain contexts, but it's a nice option if you want to do that. I hope that that answers your question, Chelsea.
Yes, it makes sense. Also,
Wonderful.
I like seeing it because then it like makes even more sense because then you can see all the different changes. So
yeah, it's really cool. And once you've published it, then you can see it on the fly. So I now have a standalone URL for this timeline. And if I put this in chat, you can actually click on it. A couple things to remember here. Okay, if I were to close out this browser, this tab, I would lose this information. So I always like to save it somewhere else. I'm going to go ahead and save it here for now. And again, I like to create like a pretty tiny URL for it. Now that it's published, anytime I update it, I don't have to go through those steps again. All I have to do is refresh the timeline, the live timeline. And then Brent, to your question, here is where I would get that HTML. So I like to grab the HTML as well, in case I do want to embed it, and I record it somewhere. Usually I put it in a plain text editor or something, but that way I have that. Because again, once I move away from this, I've lost it. But now it's published. So now we can go in together, and I'm going to put this in chat. You can open up the spreadsheet and start putting some content in here. A couple things to remember as you start, and please go ahead and start entering stuff. There's a few things to keep in mind. One, again, you never want to change the labels on row 1. That will throw an error. You don't want to add columns after R. That will throw an error. And I learned that the hard way last year. Sometimes, but not always, an empty row can throw an error. It's not consistent. But you can have as many empty rows at the bottom of your timeline as you want. But see, what's really lovely about this is that, I can see that Evan is putting content in row 6. And I only know it's Evan because Evan put their name in. But for the most part, oops, I don't want to show that. You come in as anonymous. Evan happens to be logged into his email, which is why I apologize if that flashed. So you can see everyone's got sort of a different color. And you can kind of see who's working on what, right? So you want to find something where you don't see somebody highlighting a row and just start entering some content. You can experiment with grabbing a URL, an image from the web, or you can use one from this folder here, and I'll put the link to that one more time in chat. Or you can try to grab a video. You can go to YouTube and grab a video. If you do that, what you want to do actually is, let me go to our YouTube channel. You just want to make sure that you click the share button and use the actual copy it here. That's going to be your best bet for embedding or YouTube. Last time I checked, SoundCloud didn't work well. So someone had wanted to embed a podcast and it just wasn't working. I don't know if that technology has been updated. So what we're going to do is give it a few minutes, play around with it, and then I'll update the actual public live timeline. When you're done, what you want to do is sort of click off of the last cell that you were editing. If the change won't sort of set in until you've clicked through everything. So for whoever just put, I think this was Evan, you just put a background color in. Until you click away, now that change has set in. And thank you for remembering the hashtag. That's something that sometimes folks forget to do. While you are entering some content in here, let me just talk a little bit about alternative options for timelines. So one option, this is a really great way to engage students in the classroom. But again, as you can see, sometimes it's a little hard to make that conceptual leap to a row of a spreadsheet equals a whole a whole event or a point in a timeline. And we've been experimenting here at SDSU with streamlining the process for some classes, where I create a Google form where it's sort of the same format as the spreadsheet. The students enter their content and load an image directly into the Google form. And then I transform the spreadsheet that comes out of the Google form into the template. And if this is something that you're interested in figuring out how to do, I have some documentation for you here, this section of the quick sheet. So if that's something you want to do. If you want to try different tools, another really great timeline tool that I like, though it's not collaborative, which means you can't have multiple people working on the timeline simultaneously, is Adobe Spark. Adobe Spark is free even outside of the Creative Cloud, although I log in using my SDSU account. And I think I do it this way. I don't remember. It's been a while. It's probably going to make me do dual authentication. So we'll see if I can actually log in real time. Oh, there we are. I can, that's a video, that's a page. This was one I was working on. It's a really lovely kind of sort of continuous scrolling kind of thing. You can't get unique URLs to specific points in the Spark story, but it's actually really nice. So it is another way to do a timeline. And you could always use something like PowerPoint or Google Slides generally. Yeah, I'm sorry, there was a...
No, yeah, I was just going to ask about this tool that we were focusing on here today. It's when you get the URL or the HTML embed code, my understanding is that it's still being, in some capacity, being hosted by NightLab. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so wherever you place it from there, it's still ultimately kind of communicating back to NightLab.
Yes.
And I'm kind of in the back, and I guess I'm asking, I don't mean to sound like cryptic with why I'm asking the way I'm asking. I always see these different tools and I think, like, how can I use it, not just maybe in its intended setting, but maybe in a creative capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, if I could somehow turn this into a piece of electronic literature,
Mm-hmm.
And then I were to share that with, let's say, a journal, and then that is, can this be exported somehow from NightLab and hosted through another server, or?
I think so. Yes. I've never tried it. Let me just see. Usually they have, let me just see. Actually, I'm not 100% sure about this aspect of it. I will need to do some research about that. What I will say is, and I can kind of see where you're going with this, there are some risks to using this. One risk is, and this happened to us a couple of years ago, where there was a bug in the TimelineJS platform, and we were about to host a showcase for all the timelines that our students had done, and the tools all broke. And we couldn't control that. So that's a risk. The other risk is if something happens on the Google side, that timeline disappears. We once had a student create an awesome timeline, and she then went ahead a couple of years later and deleted her spreadsheet. So we lost the timeline. So what we do for that is we download all of the timeline, all of the spreadsheets, and I store them as Excel files on my computer. Worst case scenario, I could put it back into a new template. But we are still dependent on both Google and TimelineJS being there. And this is, of course, the risk with everything we do that's digital and browser and internet-based, right? There's always going to be a risk. You'll see in some of our older timelines that if people are linking out to other images on the web, that if that image link changes or the image is taken down, then that no longer renders in the timeline, right? It's not a static thing. It's a dynamic thing that can constantly change. So there's always risks there. In terms of whether you could take the technology and host it yourself, some of their tools do allow that. I'm not entirely sure about this one. This is the first tool that Night Lab came out with. So it's the oldest. It functions a little bit differently than some of their other tools as a result of that. Brent, I will look into that and get back to you because I don't know for sure.
Sorry,
Oh, wait,
my weird off the wall question.
No, this is a great question. And in fact,
This is the oldest like server or oldest template?
no, it's the oldest tool that they've created.
Tool.
They have multiple tools, and this is just one of their many tools.
Also, is this the only way you can do a timeline?
No,
Like the other way. So it's
no,
like
as I said, there are other tools out there. This is just the tool I've picked for you today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. So let's now see how the timeline is looking. And I know some of you might not be fully done. So here's the thing. I've already published this. I don't need to hit refresh on the spreadsheet because this is a dynamic spreadsheet. It's not like Excel loaded into Google Drive. It is an actual Google spreadsheet. So let me find our timeline. Here we go. Here's the timeline. So what I'm going to do is hit refresh. And what I'm seeing is that we didn't throw any errors. There are times when there's an error in the data entry. And oftentimes when that happens, they will tell you what the error is and you can debug it on the fly. We're just such a brilliant group of people that we don't have to worry about that today. But as I scroll through, I can see this. Now there's no text or image here. Here's mine. Here's Stephanie put in, this is Pablo, dogs resting, chilling on the patio, baby alligator from Evan, thank you so much. Now, in this case, Evan writes, check out this video. And look, we've got some linkage here. And we can talk about whether if you wanted to actually embed this video in the timeline, we could just put the embed code in. So for instance, let me open this in a new tab. Okay, if I were to click share and grab the embed code and copy that in and put that here, check out this video. What I could do is, I'm just putting a paragraph break in here, putting in that. And now because I didn't use the hash bookmarks, I have to scroll back to Evans. Let's see if I did this correctly on the fly. And now it's embedded in. And now I don't have to click out to YouTube to do that. So again, I just copied the HTML code from YouTube. I can actually change the start time. And I can configure, if I want to have a different size, I can configure the size, the width or the height. Let me just check chat here. Yes, it is very cool. And then we've got more puppies. I think that was mine. Patty put this one in. So you all have now just created a timeline. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. We have 3 minutes left, and I want to see if there are any last questions, observations, comments, things you were hoping to learn that, that I didn't cover in this hour.
Can you have more than one color for a background? Like, how would you do that?
Not in a slide. So
Not in a slide. Okay.
yeah, you can only have one color or one image in the background. So you can have different colors for different events, but you can only have one actual color. Unless you created a background image that was multiple colors, loaded that somewhere like Dropbox or Google Drive, and then put that in as your like image URL. So that would be the workaround for that.
Okay,
And
sounds
then if
good.
you don't use a color, it just defaults to the white color, the white background.
Yeah, but that's so boring.
One thing to keep in mind, depending on the color you pick, let me go back to share my screen one more time. Sometimes it makes it hard to read. So it's the one thing I find frustrating is I can't always change the color of the font. And I've not been able to figure it out, but sometimes it, like here, it's white and it's really hard to read. It just like automatically goes to white font on a colored background versus
Okay, so you're doing
black font
cyan
on
and magenta for the colors and everything.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Cyan and magenta. And like, what's the other one? The other color that goes with the 3 for like digital and also printing?
We were using hex codes.
Oh,
So
okay.
you can use any hex code that you want. Sorry, can't find, where's my hex generator? Here we go. So you would just pick the font family the color family that you want, and then where on the gradation you want it, and you would just copy that. This also gives you nice little complementary colors. There's color palettes you can use, things like that. But again, the one thing to keep in mind is it makes the font automatically white. And that can sometimes be hard to read. And even when I've tried to use HTML code to change the color of the font, it still doesn't always work. So you just want to be careful about the colors. Some very dark colors, some colors can be hard to read. I think this is a little hard on the eyes. And then of course, we want to be thoughtful about color blindness and things like that with the colors that we pick. But that's just an option for you there. I did
So also like around the pictures of like the animals, why is it gray?
That's because I've put an image into Google Slides and the image doesn't have the sort of best ratio aspect. Whereas, sorry, let me go back.
And so how would you do that? Like how would
you would have to size your image appropriately.
Okay.
So for
instance, so in the placement of it, does it say the actual size that it would be?
Hang on one second. This is an image I grabbed from the web and it's sort of well formatted. Google Drive and Dropbox don't do that. So if you wanted to do that, the spreadsheet does not actually give you that information. And it does say that it works with SoundCloud, but I've had trouble getting that to work.
So like whenever you get an image from like whatever search engine you use, like would it say the actual size that it's best at? Like the actual like visibility?
It depends. This one happens to give me the dimensions. Not all of them will.
Okay, so you know, like whenever you make it too large, it's going to turn out really grainy.
You only have to worry about that if you are loading your images directly into like Google Drive. You don't really have to worry about that because these are not what we would call TIFFs, which are very large files. These are either JPEGs or PNGs. They're compressed. They're smaller images. They should render
okay, so
fine.
it's a zip? Like a zip?
A what?
Like a zip?
No. TIFF. Let me write that in. So TIFF is a very large image file, but you would never put that on the web. You'd only have either a .jpg or a .png. And so you don't really have to worry about graininess in this context. If you had an image in the background of your timeline, like back here, then you could run into issues with rendering, depending on the ratios of the image. And I don't know, you'd have to consult the help documentation for things like that. So I can't answer that on the fly. Sure. So if you haven't yet already, I did put a link to the workshop tool refresher feedback in chat.
Yes, I got it.
And I will say that the next event we have, the next tool refresher is October 8th where we will be doing another tool from the Night Lab called StoryMap.js, and then we'll move on to other tools outside of the Night Lab family. So I'm going to stop the recording, and I just want to thank you all for joining me.